a renowned author and civil rights activist. His writing and activism incorporate LGBTQ+ rights, racism, homelessness, religion, philosophy, and beyond. He has several books for sale that you can check out online. We can get you information on where to go to get those. But we just want to thank you for coming out, and go ahead and come on up.
Hey y'all, how's it going? Good to see you. Well, I'm excited to be here just to get some street cred. I grew up in Middle Tennessee. I was raised in and around Franklin. I went to Bethesda Middle School, or Bethesda Elementary and Page Middle School, and then I went to private school in Cool Springs, New Song Christian Academy. So if you needed to know why I'm so fucked up, that was now you know. So I hope that in this keynote speech I will be able to give a glowing example of why the fascists want books banned. Authors are extremely dangerous to fascism. Which is funny because it was also an author who invented fascism. So that's the problem with writing, isn't it? And banning books is that, you know, they always want every book except for Mein Kampf set on fire. And so that's the issue that we're facing today. And not to be overly contentious, but I do want to disagree with a couple of things. And I'm going to set the precedent for this, is that I was actually diagnosed with dyslexia right down the road at the Center for the Study and Treatment of Dyslexia at MTSU. And I was diagnosed and I was told that I would never read or write past a second grade reading level. And as a result of that diagnosis, I was signed up for the Library for the Blind and Dyslexic, and I was able to begin reading, not in a physical book, but I was being read to by all of the wonderful volunteers who would read those lovely books. So the first time I entered Narnia, the first time I went on the range with the Ingalls, the first time that I went exploring and sleuthing, and all of those amazing things that we do in books, I did through the Library of the Blind and the Dyslexic. And one of the things that never happened to me while I was doing that is I was never told there was a book that I couldn't get. And I read a lot of books. I mean, we were just, you remember when Netflix was sent to you in the mail? Mm-hmm. If you wanted to know if I was old, Netflix used to be sent to you in the mail, and that was what they would do, is they would just drop these books and then you would exchange them and it would come back. And fortunately, I like to tell people I didn't get better, I was just given better tools. And so I began to write. And so they were wrong. I was not limited to reading and writing past a second grade reading level. As a matter of fact, if my books have been criticized for anything, it's that why is he writing so lofty? And so I think I did okay. That all being said, you know, there's so much that I think gets lost in how we tell stories. And if you watch what's happening now, a lot of what they're trying to do is put us in a really difficult position. They've got teachers fighting against decency laws, right? And the way that they use those words is they want to make it difficult for you to fight against what's happening. That's why they name everything the such and such pedophile fighting act and all that stuff, so that you're not the assholes out there. It's like, well, I'm fighting against the Fight Against Pedophiles Act, but let me explain. You know, like that's the goal, is they're using words intentionally to make fighting difficult. That's the plan. And they're making it dangerous. One of the things I like to remind people of is that very few people wake up in the morning and say, you know what I want to be when I grow up? An activist. Most of us became activists because we were doing something normal and something very bizarre happened to us, right? You went to go check out a book and they told you no. You went to go get an abortion and they told you no. And you were like, I thought yesterday this was okay. When did this shift? When did it change? One of the experiences that changed me was I was serving as a priest, and my family had all moved from Tennessee to Pensacola, Florida. And so I decided, since my whole family was down there, and I had become a priest to work with people who were experiencing homelessness. There's kind of homelessness everywhere. So I moved to Pensacola, Florida to be closer to my family. The day that I arrived, my brother was in a metal band, and they were playing a concert at a little venue downtown Pensacola. I show up, I had just packed everything out of my house, arrive at the venue. My brother was in kind of a shitty metal band, so they were already done by 9 o'clock. I showed up at 9:30, and we're standing there in the parking lot of the venue, and I heard these guys just screaming, raising a ruckus, and I look across the way, and across from this bar called Seville Quarter in Pensacola, Florida, there were these about 40, 50 guys in khaki pants and white polo shirts, and they had all these signs that said, "Turn or burn, you're going to hell." And I look over, it was like somebody had ordered Westboro Baptist Church off of Wish, you know? And I look over, I was like, well, that's not very nice. And see, I was a priest, and so I owned one pair of clothing. It was my clerical attire with the white collar, and I look over there, and I said, well, I don't like that. I don't like what they're doing. That's mean. They're yelling at all those people. And see, the problem is, since I had just moved, I had just had a yard sale. And so I made a yard sale sign myself on a piece of poster board, and it was in the back of my car. So a yard sale on one side, but was entirely blank on the other side. And since I had made that sign myself, I also still had the Sharpie that I used to make that. So I pulled both of those utensils out of my vehicle, set it on the hood of the car, and I began to inscribe a very Christ-like message. I'm with stupid and an arrow. And I walk over to the Bible stuffers and stand right in the middle of it. Right? And they get very mad, and they're like, you can't do that. And I was like, well, I'm doing it anyways, so I don't know what we're going to do about that. And about 15 minutes later, a cop pulls up and gets out of his car, and he goes, hey, you can't do that. I was like, well, why not? He's like, your sign's offensive. He looks at me, he goes, well, they're preaching the gospel. I was like, oh, my bad, I'm sorry. See, I'm preaching the gospel too. See, I'm preaching the gospel of I'm was stupid, and look, they all showed up, so we're good to go. And we get into a little bit of an altercation, and he yanks my sign out of my hand and starts to walk across the street. And I look at him and I say, that's a violation of my constitutional rights. He turns around and goes, which one? Now, y'all, I don't know why I had a copy of the United States Constitution on me at the time, but if you will, picture this. You got, like 20-something Bible thumpers on this side with their Bibles out, screaming hellfire and damnation. 20 Bible thumpers on this side, also hellfire and damnation. And then me, dead-ass sinner, with an open copy of the Constitution yelling at a cop, right? So this is the scene. And so I start explaining to the police officer about illegal search and seizure, and that he's got to give me my property back. And he looks at me and he says, son, if you say one more word, you're going to jail. Apparently, putting your hands like this and saying, does this count? Counted. So next thing I know, I'm in the back of a cop car. It's my first day in town. I don't know if you know this about the priesthood. You're not supposed to get arrested. They do not like that a lot. And so I'm in the back of the car, and then it dawns on me that I had forgotten to call and tell a very important person in my life that I had made it to town safely. My mother. So my first telephone call, and my only telephone call that I was currently allowed to make, was to my mother to ask for bail. So that is the day that I became an activist. I didn't intend to become an activist. I tell people it happened to me. I was just minding my own business. I was within my constitutional rights, and then the next thing I knew, I was in big trouble. So I applaud everyone here for taking up this charge. It's not easy, and it shouldn't have to happen. When Russia invaded Ukraine, I served as a priest in the Russian Orthodox Church, and I had left in 2013. Again, not intending to become an activist. I was just serving as a priest, doing the best that I could. And then a couple of ladies in a band called Pussy Riot were thrown in jail. And all of a sudden I realized what was happening. But what was scarier to me was that the things that my fellow clergy were saying. They were saying things like, we need to see through the Russification of America. The plan, long before 2016, was for us to get here. This has not been an accident. This isn't something new. It's not something that started in Rutherford County. This has been way too organized. And I'm not talking about conspiracy theories or anything like that. I am talking about a genuinely dangerous dictator who is attempting to destabilize democracy. And so I say this because the other day a friend of mine called me on the phone, and magically I answered, and he said to me, do you think that we are heading to civil war? And I said, my dear sweet child, how cute that you think we're not already in one. And I do not say that lightly, and I don't know what we will consider the first shots of this thing. But we are in a very dangerous time. And the work that you are doing now is not insignificant. It is extremely important. Because out of one side of their mouth, they are saying, but the children. Listen, man, if y'all want to deal with pedophiles, you could start with the Southern Baptist Convention of the Roman Catholic Church. So you could worry about the plank in your own eye and then worry about books. They're a thing that you read. You open them up. You've probably heard of them. And so,
far less harmful.
And there's more than just one. That was a joke about the Bible. So, you know, it's frustrating what is happening here. And I just came off of a 51-city speaking tour. And it was interesting. I learned a lot from that experience. And I remember I was in Colorado. And it was a crowd about this size, but extremely unruly. I mean, these people they were lovely human beings, but my Lord, they would not be quiet. They were just heckling the whole, not mean heckling, just the whole time. It was just nonstop, back and forth. I mean, these people were having a really good time. And then I was telling a story about having lived in Pensacola, and I referenced Matt Gaetz, negatively, just so everyone knows what I'm saying. And I referenced Matt Gaetz, and the crowd booed me. Now, I know they were booing Matt Gaetz, but it felt incoming, you know, like it felt personal. And I looked at him and I said, you know, y'all have Lauren Boebert. Like, who are you to judge? But then suddenly, like, the unruliness of the crowd at a show made a lot of sense, you know? Like, they were sitting there vaping the whole time, being really a lot like giving each other hand jobs. It all of a sudden made a lot of sense. And so I think it's a cultural thing there in Colorado. But what was interesting is at this show, as unruly as everyone was being, there was this kid, 12 years old, sitting over to my left, and she was just on the edge of her seat, paying attention to everything that I am saying. And when we got to the Q&A, she raised her hand. She said, I have a question. I said, okay, what's your question? She's like, well, they're banning books at my school, and I'm fighting it. And after this, could I read you what I've written for when I go speak at the school board? And I said, yes, I will. I said, but I want you to plug your ears real quick. She said, okay. And I looked at this group of grown-ups who were just having the time of their life. And I said, shame on every one of you. This kid should be worrying about sports, preparing for school, fantasizing about what prom will one day be like. This is what she should be worried about. Why are we letting the kids fight this battle? It isn't theirs to fight. And they are being used, children are being used as a pawn in this game. And they are the ones that are being harmed. Now, I will close with this thought. How many of y'all are from Tennessee, like born and raised from Tennessee? All right, so the rest of you Yankees need to sit down. I'm going to give you a history lesson real quick. A friend of mine, when I was on tour, he made a reference. He said, the South lost the Civil War. I said, I'd like to correct you. The Confederacy lost the Civil War, and the South won because they got to stay. And I think that our words really, really matter. And how we define things really, really matters. Because I'd like to remind you and maybe educate some of you that when we dealt with this problem the last time, when they tried to divide us the last time, you know, the state of Tennessee supplied more Union soldiers than any other state. And they waited until all of those boys in blue went to Virginia, and then they held the vote for secession. Then they came back, marched to Knoxville, tried to turn anything east of the Cumberland into Tennessee and secede so that they could stay in the Union. When that didn't work, they marched their happy butts straight to Nashville, Tennessee, whooped the Confederate Army, and won Tennessee back. And so I like to remind people that the South won because it was Southerners fighting Southerners to make sure that we would stay united. And so I am not concerned about the state of Tennessee. I know that we're going to win this thing because it's in our blood. It's in our history. And if you want to talk about heritage, it isn't some Confederate flag that wasn't even from the actual Confederacy, and they just decided to put up one day because they wanted to do whatever. We can get into all that. But the reality is, Tennessee is always going to fight against this thing. It's in our nature. And the rest of the South is fighting. Like I said, I just went on a 51 city tour. Half of it in the South, another part in the North, and another part on the West Coast. And what I will tell you, having traveled all over there, all over the country, these book bans are happening everywhere. Fascism is rising everywhere. This is the danger. It is no longer a North versus South Mason-Dixon line problem. It's splattered across the entire nation. And we have got to fight it. And so, I'm happy to be a Tennessean. And I'm happy to be here because I can tell you, when I was in California and when I was in New York, they were like, oh, the South, they're doing it again. No, we're not. We're showing you how to beat them. Because don't let it be lost on anyone that it was a black woman in the South who went after Trump when nobody else would.
That's right.
And paying the price for it. So, now that I have said all that, I'm proud of y'all for living up to that tradition, to living up to that fighting, for living up to being a volunteer state, the type of people who, when we see a problem, we stand up and we do something about it, because that's what we have to do. I'll close with this. Stories are complicated. Sometimes they involve things that are violent. Sometimes they involve things that are rough. Sometimes they involve things that are difficult. They're hard for us to imagine. And I can understand, I can sympathize with why parents don't want their kids to see that part of the world. I get it. I have 3 kids, and I've done everything that I can to protect them. When we were living near Franklin, my dad had a business. He had a kiosk at the Cool Springs Galleria. And he decided to sell that business, and a woman came over. And when she got to the house, and they were going to be discussing everything, she brought her 9-year-old son, the same age as my brother. And my dad was like, well, why don't y'all go play downstairs in the basement? We had like a finished out basement and whatever. And we were like, okay. Well, the mom missed the memo that was in the basement, which meant that there were stairs. So me and my brother both jumped down the stairs and walked just great, and everything went fine. And then this kid takes one step and just tumbles down 30 stairs all the way into the basement and about broke his arm. And when his mom ran down the stairs to console him, she was weeping, and she said, I've always carried him down the stairs because I wanted to protect him. Sometimes we protect people into danger. And the reality is the world is rough and bad things happen. Sometimes people have sex. Sometimes it's good sex, sometimes it's bad sex, and sometimes they write about it. But we can't protect each other out of the world being what it is. And we can't protect children out of the world being what it is. I wish we could. I wish I could just wrap my kids in bubble wrap and that they would be innocent for the rest of their lives and they would never see the things that I have seen or experience the things that I have experienced. But what I do know is that the only way that we stop it, the only way that we make the world better, the only way that we end conflicts and wars and violence and assault and all of these horrible things that we want to protect each other from is by telling our stories and learning together. So thank you so much for this opportunity to be able to speak with you. Thank you for everything that you are doing to try and lead the nation in what it's going to look like, because this is not going to end overnight. This is well thought out and well orchestrated. And y'all are doing a fantastic job. And on behalf of myself as an author and so many other authors that I know, and we're all talking about it, and we know that the librarians are the frontline generals in this war that we are fighting. And make no mistake, whether we like to admit it or not, That's what it is. So I think we are moving into Q&A. I'll be sticking around for a while if you all have any questions for me. And again, thank you so much for this opportunity. It was lovely to talk with you.
Anyone have any questions for any of our speakers today? Oh, come on, we're not shy in here, are we?
This is a message that I think needs to be gotten beyond our group. And as a strong, lifelong Democrat, fighting to see Democrats elected so we can change the dialogue and create some healthy government. I'm trying to think of ways to accomplish that. And I think that this is a message that needs to be spread more widely. And I'm trying to think of ways that we might be able to accomplish that, because I don't think that the average Tennessean realizes how serious the problems are and how threatening they are. And I'm just interested to hear other people's thoughts as to maybe how we can better get this message out there so that people will vote accordingly with these upcoming elections.
Take that one?
If you remember, I don't mean to make you stuck here, but now you are. If you remember when I was talking earlier about the way that they use language, they craft the names of these laws in such a way that we look like the villain fighting against them, because people don't read past the headline a lot of times. And so one of the things that we would do back in the day, when I would fight a lot of these anti-homeless laws that were coming up. And so we would rename the laws in the vocabulary of the conversation, right? They would pass these, laws, and they would be called something like the Sanitation and Safety Act or something like that, right? And so people are like, oh yeah, I want to be safe and I want things to be sanitary, right? But then you would go read it, and it's like, you can't sleep outside, all this kind of stuff. So then you couldn't cover yourself with anything, and it listed everything you couldn't cover yourself with. Blankets, newspapers, cardboard, but nobody was reading those things, right? So what we would start doing is we would nickname these laws something actually cutting to the heart of what they were doing. So we started calling it the anti-blanket law. And what we did is we forced the government to have to call it what it was, right? And so it made them have to shift their language, because we brought the part that people weren't reading to the headline. And so I think one of the things, we're all here because we like words, right? Like, that's why we're here. We like words, whether they're spoken or written or read to us. We like words, and so utilize the words and shift the conversation in that way. So, book ban even sometimes gets lost on people. Call it really what it is. I think we've gotten... Listen, I love the Obamas. But there's only so high we can go before we got to just jump in the ring and start punching. And the problem is, I think we're afraid to use the words that we have to use. Like, we have to be saying fascist. I said it 7 times tonight because we're afraid. We don't want to be the one calling names. And when I was on tour, a woman came up to me and she said, I'm so afraid because I've been doing this for so long, and I'm afraid that people are making threats and they're doing all of these things, and I'm afraid that I am going to die. And what I said to her is, they start with banning books and then it's people. And so you can die fighting, or you can die standing in line wondering how we got here. And so That's the end game. And we have to start actually saying those things. We have to call these things what they are. We're past playing nice. Children are being hurt. Children are dying. Kids are killing themselves in school. And I'm not saying this to try and scandalize anyone, but we are past the point of nice. And I'm not saying violence. I'm saying throw the words right back in their face and call a spade a spade. Call fascism, fascism. Call racism, racism. And don't let them get away with it. Just an opinion.